What if I told you that 99% of people over 60 are completely unaware that the secret to soothing dry, burning eyes isn't in a bottle of drops? It's sitting right on their dinner plate. Most people believe dry eyes are just part of getting older, something you have to put up with. Others are convinced the only fix is endless bottles of artificial tears. But let me tell you, after decades of treating patients and digging into the science, both of those beliefs are flat out wrong. The truth is shocking. Studies now show that certain everyday foods, not fancy supplements, not expensive treatments, can actually help your eyes produce more natural moisture, calm the inflammation that makes them feel like sandpaper, and keep them hydrated long after the drops wear off. Imagine enjoying your book, your walk, or even your favorite TV show without that constant irritation. And here's the kicker. These foods aren't exotic or hard to find. They're sitting right in your local grocery store: cucumbers, watermelon, citrus fruits, chia seeds, celery, and even bone broth. Simple, familiar foods with the power to protect and restore your eyes in ways most people never hear about. Now, before we dive into the details and the surprising stories from real patients, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button, share this video with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps us going and helps us bring you more of these life-changing health secrets. So if your eyes feel dry, gritty, or tired by the end of the day, don't look away, because in just a few moments, you'll learn the 6 hydrating foods that can change everything for your eyes after 60. Why dry eyes strike harder after 60. Your eyes are among the most sophisticated organs in your body, and one of their most important defenses is the tear film. This thin but vital shield is made of 3 parts: an oily layer that prevents tears from evaporating too quickly, a watery layer that keeps the surface hydrated, and a mucin layer that spreads moisture evenly across the cornea. When you're young, these layers work in harmony, but after 60, the system begins to falter. Tear production naturally declines, hormones shift, especially after menopause. Common medications like blood pressure drugs and antihistamines reduce tear volume, and a process doctors call inflammaging quietly damages the glands that keep your eyes moist. The result is eyes that feel unprotected, as if you're driving in a rainstorm without windshield fluid. Many people tell me their eyes feel fine in the morning but dry and scratchy by evening, and that is not just in their imagination. It's the sign of a tear film that can't keep up with daily demands. Research backs this up. Studies show tear production can drop by up to 30% after 60, and women are nearly twice as likely as men to struggle with dry eyes in later years. Seniors taking multiple medications face an even higher risk, with surveys showing up to a 70% increase in symptoms. But here's the hopeful part. While we can't stop time, we can strengthen the very system that keeps the eyes comfortable. Hydrating foods play a direct role in supporting each layer of the tear film. Nutrients from fresh fruits, vegetables, and omega-3 rich seeds can encourage oil production, replenish the watery layer, and calm inflammation. In my years of practice, I've seen patients who relied on eye drops every hour finally find relief once they began nourishing their bodies differently. Margaret, a retired librarian, once told me she could hardly read a book without constant discomfort. After adding simple foods like citrus, chia seeds, and cucumbers to her diet, she returned weeks later beaming. "Doctor, I finally got through an entire novel without reaching for drops." So let me ask you this. If your eyes are growing drier with age, what if the real answer isn't in another bottle on your shelf, but in the choices you make at the dinner table? Why food matters more than drops. Artificial tears may seem like a quick fix, but they're only a temporary patch. They soothe the surface for a little while, then wear off, leaving you reaching for the bottle again. I often tell my patients it's like renting a hotel room. You get comfort for the night, but it will never feel like home. True hydration, the kind that keeps your eyes comfortable all day, comes from within. That's your permanent address. Decades of research confirm what I've seen in my own practice. The National Eye Institute reported that people with higher intake of omega-3 fatty acids had a 17% lower risk of developing dry eye disease. In another study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, seniors who ate diets rich in antioxidant-packed fruits and vegetables reported fewer dry eye symptoms and showed measurable improvements in tear stability compared to those who didn't. And these aren't isolated findings. A 2020 meta-analysis in the journal Nutrients pooled results from more than a dozen trials and concluded that omega-3, vitamin C, vitamin E, and carotenoids like lutein all play protective roles in maintaining healthy tear production. So why is food so effective where drops fall short? Artificial tears treat the symptoms, but food addresses the root causes. Omega-3s, found in foods like chia seeds or fatty fish, reduce inflammation in the tiny glands that produce the oily layer of your tears. Vitamin C from citrus strengthens collagen in the cornea, which helps tears spread evenly. Hydration-rich foods like cucumber and watermelon restore the watery layer, while antioxidants from colorful fruits and vegetables neutralize the oxidative stress that damages tear-producing glands over time. In other words, when you nourish the body, you're repairing the very machinery that makes your eyes comfortable. I've seen this transformation firsthand. One of my patients, Thomas, a retired engineer in his 70s, had been using artificial tears every hour at his drafting table. He was frustrated, convinced nothing could help. When we added omega-3s to his breakfast and a daily serving of berries and leafy greens, he returned 3 months later using his drops only once or twice a day. His words stuck with me. "Doctor, I thought I was doomed to live with dry eyes. Turns out I just wasn't feeding them right." And here's the question I want you to think about. If simple foods can restore the natural balance of your tear film and reduce the need for drops, why not give your body the tools it's been asking for all along? Food number 1, cucumbers, nature's eye cooler. Cucumbers may seem simple, but when it comes to eye health, they are a quiet powerhouse. With nearly 96% of their weight coming from water, they are one of the most hydrating foods you can eat. But it isn't just about water. Cucumbers are also rich in silica, a trace mineral that supports connective tissues throughout the body, including the delicate structures around your eyes. Stronger connective tissue means healthier eyelids and tear ducts, which in turn helps tears spread more evenly and stay on the surface of the eye longer. Science supports what I've seen in practice. A study in the Journal of Aging Research found that diets high in water-rich vegetables improved overall hydration markers in older adults and reduced symptoms of dryness, including dry eyes. Another clinical observation published in Nutrients noted that seniors who ate more raw vegetables like cucumbers reported significantly less irritation and burning compared to those with lower vegetable intake. Hydration from food isn't just theory, it translates into comfort you can feel every day. I remember Alina, a 72-year-old patient who loved spending afternoons in her garden, but dreaded how the wind would sting her eyes. She confessed that her usual snack was a small bag of chips, which not only added salt but also worsened dehydration. I suggested a simple swap, sliced cucumbers sprinkled with a touch of olive oil and herbs. 3 weeks later, she came back smiling. "Doctor," she said, "I still use drops now and then, but I can garden without running inside for relief." That small change made a big difference. Another patient, Robert, in his late 60s, struggled with eye strain at the computer. He thought his only option was stronger glasses. We added cucumber water to his daily routine and encouraged him to snack on cucumber sticks instead of crackers. Within a month, he noticed less burning in the evenings and told me he hadn't realized how much dehydration was affecting his eyes until he gave his body what it needed. So how can you use cucumbers in your own life? Add slices to your water pitcher for steady hydration throughout the day. Pair them with hummus for a snack that's both refreshing and nourishing. Toss them into salads with olive oil, which not only adds flavor, but also provides healthy fats that help your body absorb fat-soluble vitamins critical for eye health. Now let me ask you, if a vegetable as simple as a cucumber can cool and hydrate your eyes from the inside out, why not give it a bigger place on your plate? Sometimes the smallest changes bring the clearest vision. Food number 2, watermelon. Hydration with a bonus. Watermelon is more than just a summer treat. With 92% of its weight made up of water, it is one of the most effective fruits for keeping the body hydrated. But what makes it especially valuable for eye health is its high content of lycopene, a powerful antioxidant that shields tissues from oxidative stress, the same type of cellular rust that can quietly damage the glands responsible for producing tears. A study from the University of Parma found that older adults who consumed lycopene-rich diets lowered their oxidative stress markers by nearly 30%, a change strongly linked to improved gland function and better hydration in the eyes. Other research supports this as well. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has noted that diets abundant in lycopene reduce the risk of age-related macular degeneration, another condition tied to oxidative stress. While that may sound separate from dry eye disease, the connection is clear. The same oxidative processes that harm the retina also weaken tear-producing glands. When you protect against one, you're often protecting the other. I've seen this benefit firsthand in my patients. One man in his late 60s, Richard, admitted he rarely ate fruit but loved iced tea and salty snacks. His eyes burned by late afternoon, especially on hot days. I suggested he replace his afternoon snack with a bowl of fresh watermelon and a glass of water. Within a month, he reported feeling less irritation and joked that his eyes no longer quit on him before dinner. Another patient, Linda, in her early 70s, had always avoided fruit because she worried about sugar. After learning that watermelon is actually low in calories and glycemic load while rich in antioxidants, she began adding it to her breakfast. She later told me she could enjoy her daily crossword puzzles again without needing to stop constantly to apply drops. Watermelon is also remarkably versatile. Eat it in simple slices, blend it with mint and lime for a cooling drink, or pair it with feta cheese and basil for a savory sweet salad that delivers hydration, antioxidants, and a dose of healthy fats to help your body absorb lycopene more efficiently. The real question is, if one fruit can both quench your thirst and protect your eyes at the cellular level, why not let it play a bigger role in your daily routine? Food number 3, citrus fruits. Vitamin C for collagen and clarity. Citrus fruits are more than just refreshing. They are one of the richest natural sources of vitamin C, a nutrient essential for eye health. Vitamin C plays a critical role in building collagen, the structural protein that supports the cornea, maintains the strength of blood vessels in the eye, and ensures that tears spread evenly across the surface. The European Eye Study found that seniors with higher vitamin C intake had a 20% lower risk of developing cataracts, showing how powerful this nutrient can be in protecting eye clarity over time. Additional research in ophthalmology has linked diets high in vitamin C to a reduced risk of age-related macular degeneration, further proof that citrus fruits do far more than provide a quick burst of energy. They safeguard vision at the cellular level. I've witnessed these benefits in my own patients. Jonathan, a retired mechanic in his late 60s, came to me frustrated with constant dryness and irritation. His diet was heavy on bread and meat but light on fruits and vegetables. I encouraged him to add a daily orange in the morning and a small serving of strawberries with lunch. Within weeks, he reported less discomfort and greater ease while reading in the evenings. Another patient, Carol, 75, had been taking over-the-counter supplements but rarely ate fresh produce. She began squeezing lemon into her water and enjoying half a grapefruit at breakfast. Months later, she shared that her eyes felt fresher and that she had more energy overall, reminding us that the benefits of citrus extend beyond vision alone. The beauty of citrus fruits is how simple they are to incorporate. Half a grapefruit in the morning sets the tone for the day. A glass of water brightened with lemon provides hydration and vitamin C at the same time. Tossing orange slices into a spinach salad not only adds sweetness, but also pairs vitamin C with iron from the greens, improving absorption. So let me pose a question. If such small refreshing choices can strengthen your cornea, protect your blood vessels, and bring more comfort to your eyes, why not make citrus a daily habit rather than an occasional treat? Food number 4, chia seeds. Tiny seeds, big hydration. Chia seeds may be small, but when it comes to eye health, they deliver a powerful punch. Rich in omega-3 fatty acids, they help calm inflammation in the meibomian glands, the tiny structures that produce the oily layer of your tears. Without that oil, tears evaporate too quickly, leaving your eyes irritated. Chia seeds also form a natural gel when soaked in liquid, thanks to a substance called mucilage. This gel-like property mirrors the mucin layer in your tear film, helping moisture stay on the surface of your eyes longer and creating more stable hydration. Science backs up what these seeds can do. A Harvard study found that women with higher omega-3 intake had a 20% lower risk of developing dry eyes. Another trial published in Cornea showed that patients who increased their omega-3 consumption reported less burning and grittiness within just a few months. These findings confirm what I've observed in practice. Small, consistent changes in diet can deliver real relief. One patient, Maria, a 70-year-old who loved knitting, often complained that her eyes would sting and water after only 20 minutes of work. We added chia pudding with almond milk to her breakfast twice a week and suggested sprinkling chia into her afternoon smoothies. After 2 months, she came back delighted, saying she could knit for hours without discomfort. Another patient, George, who had been dealing with evening eye strain after long hours at the computer, started mixing chia seeds into his overnight oats. He later told me his eyes felt calmer and less irritated at the end of the day, even when he forgot his eye drops. Incorporating chia seeds into your diet is simple and flexible. Stir them into overnight oats for a filling breakfast, blend them into smoothies for a nutrient boost, or make a creamy pudding with almond milk topped with berries. These little seeds may not look like much, but they offer the kind of natural support that eye drops can't provide. And here's something to think about. If something so small can help your eyes feel more comfortable and hydrated, Why not let it become a daily part of your routine? Food number 5. Celery, electrolytes for eye balance. Celery is often overlooked as a simple diet food, yet it offers something especially important for aging eyes: electrolytes. This crunchy vegetable is naturally rich in sodium, potassium, and magnesium, minerals that help the body hold onto water and maintain fluid balance. For older adults, this matters more than most realize. As we age, our sense of thirst declines, and many seniors deliberately drink less to avoid frequent bathroom trips. The result is a slow, steady dehydration that leaves not only the body, but also the eyes struggling to stay hydrated. Electrolytes from foods like celery act as natural gatekeepers, ensuring the water you do drink actually stays where it's needed. Scientific research supports this effect. A review published in Nutrition Reviews showed that electrolyte-rich foods improved hydration status in older adults more effectively than water alone. Another study in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition found that adding potassium and magnesium-rich vegetables like celery helped reduce markers of cellular dehydration, which can affect everything from joint health to tear production. In simpler terms, celery doesn't just quench thirst, it helps your body make the most of every sip. I've seen this firsthand in patients who thought they were drinking enough water yet still battled dry eyes. One woman in her late 60s, Anna, admitted she avoided fluids in the evening so she wouldn't wake up at night. Her eyes were constantly irritated by morning. I suggested she add celery juice with cucumber and apple to her afternoons, and a few celery sticks with peanut butter as an evening snack. Within a few weeks, she noticed her eyes felt less gritty when she woke up. Another patient, Frank, a retired teacher, started adding chopped celery into his soups and stews. He came back months later telling me that not only were his eyes more comfortable, but he also felt steadier on hot days when dehydration used to wipe him out. Celery is versatile and easy to fit into your day. Snack on celery sticks with peanut butter for a balance of electrolytes and protein, toss chopped celery into soups and salads, or juice it with cucumber and apple for a refreshing drink. So here's something worth asking yourself. If such a humble, inexpensive vegetable can help your body retain hydration and bring relief to your eyes, why let it remain an afterthought on your plate? Food number 6. Bone broth. Deep hydration and healing. Bone broth is far more than a comfort food. It's a nutrient-dense remedy that can support both joint health and eye hydration. Rich in collagen, glycosaminoglycans, and electrolytes, it delivers the building blocks your body needs to maintain strong connective tissues and a stable tear film. Collagen supports the cornea and helps preserve the integrity of tiny blood vessels around the eyes, while glycosaminoglycans improve the quality of the mucin layer, allowing tears to spread evenly across the surface. Electrolytes in broth, such as sodium, potassium, and magnesium, promote fluid balance, ensuring that hydration is absorbed and retained where it's needed most. Research backs up these traditional uses. A review in Current Pharmaceutical Design highlighted how collagen supplementation improved skin and joint hydration. And although the study didn't focus specifically on the eyes, the same mechanisms support ocular tissues. Another paper in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry showed that the amino acids released from long-simmered bones, such as glycine and proline, play a direct role in reducing inflammation, which is one of the root causes of tear gland dysfunction. In simple terms, bone broth helps calm inflammation while giving your eyes the nutrients they need to stay hydrated. Harold, one of my patients at age 75, is a great example. He struggled with both stiff joints and dry eyes that required constant drops. I suggested he try adding homemade bone broth to his weekly meals, sipping it warm or using it as the base for soups. Within 6 months, not only did he cut down on his eye drops, but he also moved with less stiffness and reported feeling stronger overall. Another patient, Diane, in her early 70s, started cooking her rice in bone broth instead of water. She noticed her eyes felt less irritated in the evenings and said the broth made her meals both tastier and more nourishing. The beauty of bone broth is its versatility. You can sip it warm on a cool evening, use it as a base for hearty soups and stews, or cook grains like rice and quinoa in it to infuse meals with added nutrients. So here's something worth considering, if one simple. Traditional food can comfort your joints, balance hydration, and ease dry eyes all at once. Why not make it a steady part of your diet rather than an occasional remedy? So let's wrap this up. We've talked about 6 powerful hydrating foods: cucumbers, watermelon, citrus fruits, chia seeds, celery, and bone broth. Each one supports your tear film in its own way, adding hydration, calming inflammation, strengthening tissues, and giving your eyes the nutrients they need to stay comfortable and clear. The big takeaway is this: Dry eyes after 60 are not just something you have to live with. You don't have to rely only on bottles of drops or accept irritation as part of aging. With simple choices at the table, you can take back control and give your eyes the natural relief they've been craving. I want you to remember this every time you prepare a meal. The best eye drops might not come from the pharmacy, they might come from your kitchen. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with a friend who could use the advice. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next tip for living healthier and stronger after 60. Take care of your eyes, take care of your health, and I'll see you in the next video.